All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this work session for the Tigard-Tualatin School Board. I will call this work session to order at 5:01 p.m. And I will now hand it off to Director Moore et al. For our bond refinance presentation.
Good evening, everyone. We have several guests here this evening, including bond oversight, financial oversight, and budget committee members have all been invited. I haven't paid attention how that breaks down in the audience, but we also have with us our experts that have been working with us since the inception of the current bond. We have Duncan Brown from PFM. He's our financial advisor, and PFM worked with us in both the 2017 and 2019 bond issuances related to the bonds passed in the 2016 election. We also have Carol McCoo, who is our bond counsel. So there's lots of legalities related to issuing bonds, and Carol and her firm, Hawkins Delafield, have been our bond counsel for years prior to my time here. And so eventually they're here to guide us and educate us concerning issuing bonds to refund current bonds. It's kind of like the concept of a home mortgage refinancing, but a little more complex. And we wanted them here at the table to share some of the details in addition to answering questions and helping with discussion related to the bond refunding that's being proposed. And Duncan prepared the slides for our viewing tonight, and I'm going to turn it over to Duncan to lead us through what we're trying to accomplish here.
Great. Good evening. Again, I'm Duncan Brown with PFM, the independent financial advisor for the district. I've got just a few slides, so this will be brief, but we'll have plenty of time for Q&A, and please feel free to interrupt as I go. If we could turn to the first slide. So there's a lot going on this page, but I guess maybe I'll start with the chart at the bottom. This is a visual representation of the district's general obligation debt service requirements. This is a combination of all its outstanding general obligation bonds. The blue bars represent the existing annual debt service principal and interest payments. That dashed red line represents projected levy rate as dollars per thousand of assessed value. And then those two other bars in slightly different colors represent what we're talking about today. And that is a small refinancing of some bonds currently scheduled to be paid in June of 2037, which we're proposing to accelerate to June of 2025. So that red and white kind of candy cane dashed payment would effectively move up into the next fiscal year as represented by that yellow chunk in fiscal 2025. The purpose for this would be to maintain a stable levy rate between fiscal 2024 and fiscal 2025 and create additional capacity for future general obligation bonds. Unlike the 2019 bond transaction, the 2017 bonds, and probably most of the bonds that the district has contemplated or issued, this is a very small size, about $3.5 million, and a very short term. So June of 2025 is just a little over a year from now. So unlike those transactions, which were very large and had very long terms, this one would most likely be sold directly to a commercial bank as a single investor rather than publicly offered through an investment bank to the bond market as a whole. There's a lot that I just went through. I guess I'll pause and see if there are any questions about the proposed plan for restructuring. Okay. I'll go to the next slide. So on March 11th, the board will be asked to adopt a bond resolution which will look somewhat similar to previous bond resolutions, and that was drafted by Carol McCougan and her colleagues at Hawkins. This would be a delegation resolution which would authorize the chair, superintendent, chief financial officer, or others designated by those individuals essentially to execute the transaction I just described, to select which of the 2017 bonds will be refunded and to negotiate terms and execute those terms with an investor, i.e. a commercial bank. And I'll go to the following slide, which is actually my last slide, trying to keep it brief. And this is just an overview of where we are in this process. So a few weeks ago, we circulated a request for proposals to prospective lenders for this small new bond issue, this refinancing bond. And this is not a traditional procurement. This is something that's unique to effectively soliciting term sheets for a financing. So we handled that, and we expect responses on March 8th. At which point we'll have a better handle on which lenders are interested in purchasing a proposed new bond issue, as well as the rates and other terms that they'd be willing to purchase that bond. So that's March 8th. So in a few weeks, on March 11th, we will be back in front of the school board at its work session to discuss the responses and, again, plan of finance and in anticipation of the regular meeting later that evening, at which point the board would be asked to consider the authorizing resolution that I just mentioned. And from there, assuming all goes well, we would work towards closing about a month later. And I guess I will pause again.
Oh, can we go back to your first slide? That one, yeah. So I understand the mechanics of why, to do this, but I understand the mechanics of how that works. Why would we do this is the question.
Do you want me to take that, or you want? Sure. Effectively, it sets the district up, I think, in a more coherent position heading into its next bond election, because it wouldn't have this kind of stair step, or what's the right analogy? This kind of up and down cliff.
Temporary drop.
Yeah, this seesaw effect of the levy rate where it is currently dropping back down and then going back up. And this just helps us keep a stable levy rate until any new bonds come online.
In spirit of like full transparency for our constituents, then so what you're saying is that trend line there, the red dotted line, there's an increase and then there would be a decrease, right? But we're trying to ensure that once it falls in line with all the other bonds, and then it'll in 2036, I can't see, sorry, 30s, yeah, then it would stay constant as the other and then just fall again. Is that correct? Is that what I'm understanding?
So it would add another drop in that rate in 2037 where one doesn't exist currently. Mm-hmm. It would prevent a drop in rate between 24 and 25 and push that off one more year till 2026.
Okay. And what are the advantages to the district or to the constituents, or who does this impact and who does this advantage?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really just providing predictability and more stability in that rate, specifically for next fiscal year, And the other benefit is you've got a little less debt service in fiscal 2037, at which point you could, future bond authorizations could kind of fit in that space, so to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Director Weston?
Thank you. Along those same lines, would this basically be paying it sooner rather than later?
Yes.
And so would that be, but that's not part of our operating budget, so it wouldn't impact that at all?
No.
And then the graph where it shows it going down, is that without the levy that we might put to voters? So that's not reflected
Correct.
on that graph? Okay, thanks.
Director Zerschmidt?
And so then the bond that we're assuming we're going to float to voters would pick up then in 2026 and carry that line straight across. Is that the general idea of what we're assuming, and that's the logic behind this?
Correct.
Okay, and then is there any additional interest benefit of, since we're paying off, we're taking that money that we would be carrying for a very long time, and now we're going to front load it in our payments. Is there a savings overall in the amount of payment we're going to be making?
That's a great question. Based on our current estimates, we do expect a gross savings, which is maybe unsurprising because instead of 12 years of interest, you'd have one. But on a net present value basis, the savings would likely be negative just because, again, now we're paying, money is worth more the nearer it is in time. And so making that payment in fiscal 25 as opposed to fiscal 2037, there's sort of a present value mismatch there. So I guess the answer is yes and no, depending on which basis we're using.
And when we sold these bonds in 2016, presumably there was a very different interest rate then than there is now. How does that comparison happen? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's another great question. So the the bonds in question have a stated coupon rate of 5%. The bonds that are proposed to be refunded, and we're in kind of a strange market environment today in which short-term rates are actually in some cases higher than long-term rates. And I have a lot of market update slides at the back that I can refer to, but I will spare folks if we don't want to go down that path. But suffice it to say, I think we're probably looking at a rate currently of north of 5%. So the trade-off is not so much in the interest rate, it's over the period of time over which that rate is paid.
Thank you.
Got a question. So in 2037, you've got that piece that says refunded prior bond debt service. Can you tell me just functionally what that looks like, what that means in 2037?
That is the principal amount of outstanding bonds that if the district took no action, its payment would be at that level. And what we're proposing is to take basically $3.5 million from out of that payment and move it up forward in time. So that's just there to kind of show what would happen if nothing is done. But the blue bar represents the actual payment that would be effective after this transaction. So it'd be a bit of a drop down. And I have to apologize because I think the x-axis for the actual dollar amounts of debt service is inaccurate. That's just this. It's the same on both sides. It's reflecting the levy rate and not the total dollar amounts.
And so just really big picture, and I think we've all sort of got to this, but one of the main reasons, and from having conversations with Director Moore, that this is helpful to be doing right now is really in anticipation of the bond that we are going to be going out for. And so for constituents, for those voters to kind of not have that volatile sort of change, but keep things essentially like status quo, how they are, and not feel like there would be either this great drop that doesn't stay or this increase and then kind of shy away from perhaps feeling like that was something they wanted to vote for, but really kind of keeping that rate the same. That, like, strategically kind of why we're, yeah. Any other questions? Comments? Thoughts?
Have we done anything like this before in the past with taking indebtedness from the future and moving it to the present? Has the district done this before?
Yeah, in 2019, there was part of that, which was part of the 2016 authorization. Part of that transaction, I'm going from memory here, did involve a similar, not identical, but a similar approach to some outstanding debt. It was not the main focal point because there was a much larger amount of new authorization that was being sold. But yes, the district has done something similar fairly recently.
That was my recollection. I just wanted to make sure. Thank you. Yeah, so this is not a wild and crazy new idea. This is something we've done before that just makes sense to smooth out our bond rate. It helps our taxpayers in the long run, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Just one more question. It looks like the 2024 amount that we would pay is a little bit bigger than the amount we would pay in, I think that's 2026 or 2027. But I would think the red part would be bigger because we're paying it off sooner under this scenario. Is that because the discount rate's been factored in, or would we? I thought you said we were going to be paying less in real dollars if we paid it sooner.
If you take into account, which I think they're so small annually, they don't even really show up, but there are also little red and white interest payments in 2026 through 2036. So the total, yeah, the total cost of the, sorry, I've got too many.
Because it's the red and white striped part,
Yeah.
plus a tiny bit on top of everything in between the blue, everything between the red part and the yellow part. There's a little bit more that you'd have to add.
Correct. And
Okay.
so if you take
Thank you.
those, it's $167,000 annually plus the $3.5 million being refunded. You end up with about $5.5 million in total payments over that period, compared to about $3.7 million in principal and interest in fiscal 25 with the proposed new transaction.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
Looking out towards the end of this, so when it drops off, typically we have, you get a drop off and we fill that bucket back up. This produces a stair step. So would that require a different strategy than what we typically have done when we go for renewal in 36, 30, because there's a small drop off in 36 and a larger drop off in 37. So would there be a recommended strategy at the end, the next time for renewal?
Right.
I guess is my question.
Yeah, that's a great question. You're absolutely right. Typically, the district and many districts sort of structure debt to have periodic bigger stairs and bigger steps as opposed to multiple stairs with smaller steps, to kind of continue the analogy there. One of the challenges is, what will we know in 2036? And maybe I'm not saying anything that's not obvious, but it can be challenging to kind of plan that far in advance. And frankly, the fact that we're having this conversation is probably evidence of that, because there was a stair step, and I think what we're really saying is, well, we'd like to push that stair step out 1 year. Structurally, it's simple enough to kind of, if the district were to go back to voters and have a successful election and issue new bonds in fiscal 25, we could use that as an opportunity to kind of smooth that out with any new authorization.
to that point, if we would have had our election in November of 23 instead of November of 24, we would have been set up appropriately. But there was a lot of discussion a few years back that we wanted to have the election in the general presidential election.
Any other questions, comments? Right, it was very helpful. Do you have, Director Moore, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, just to
Reports?
repeat that we'll be back here for another work session March 11th, and both Carol and Duncan will be present too, but they'll be with us virtually. And then that evening, there will be the action item to approve the bond resolution.
All right, just one more chance for any other lingering questions. Director Zerschmidt's good. Okay. All right. Well, then you were very timely and you were very clear in all of your explanations. So with that, I will adjourn our work session at 5:22.